Hi, we have already seen how Axelar secures a network using the Threshold Signature Scheme, or TSS. Now, let's delve even deeper into the network's fundamental structure. The Axelar network is based on a consensus of delegated proof of stake, or DPoS, which is also the primary utilization of the Axelar tokens. To better understand the mechanism behind DPoS, I would like to go over some blockchain fundamentals as well as some alternative consensus models, including their benefits and drawbacks. Consider the following scenario. A, B, C, and D, they are four people. They are close friends who frequently interact financially with one another. The transactions are collected on a common and free to access piece of paper known as a ledger. For example, A might request that B buy him a sandwich. When B delivers the goods, instead of immediately paying up, A simply acknowledges the debt as an entry in the ledger instead. So as you can see here, so A add on the ledger that A supposed to pay B a certain amount. These individuals will come together at a later date to settle the debt. As can be seen in this example, 4 transactions have been recorded. For the first, A is supposed to pay B $10, so A net worth should decrease by 10, while B net worth should increase by 10. Repeat the procedure for each additional transaction. If we add up all the transactions, we can calculate the total change of the net worth of each person. For example, B should end up paying $10 while C should pay $20. So B pay $10, C pay $20 into a common pool, while A and D withdraw their share from that pool. Of course, using a community ledger for 4 people with only 4 transactions is trivial. But this concept is used in everyday life without your knowledge. For instance, suppose you wire $50 from your bank account in Bank 1 to your friend account in Bank 2. Obviously, it would be absurd to have a physical transfer of money between these two banks for every single transaction, given that there are likely hundreds of thousands of transactions per day. Instead, these transactions would be recorded and settled by the banks at the end of the day. The system does have some flaws, especially if someone attempts to exploit it. Assume that same transaction as before, A is supposed to pay B $10. The entry is normally recorded. What if B simply copies and pastes the entry without A permission? Meaning that A is simply paying more than he's supposed to and B just get more money. To no surprise, A is not going to be happy with that at all. Of course, that would be unjust to A. The solution is that a payer's signature is required for an entry to be valid. So the entry of A pays B needs to be accompanied by the signature of A. This is the same concept as the digital signature that was previously discussed. As a result, because B does not know A's private key, he cannot forge an entry. Another issue is the location of the ledger. Where should it be kept so that it is secure and no one can take advantage of it? Unfortunately, there isn't such a place. For example, A could volunteer to keep the ledger, but this would require the trust of everyone else. In the era of decentralization, trust should not have been a factor. As a result, the ledger is duplicated and kept by each person to solve the problem. Hence the name distributed ledger. This improves security. Each person's ledger can be compared for discrepancy. If an entry exists only in one ledger but not in the others, it is most likely invalid. In other words, in order to forge a transaction, at least half of the population must collude together. That is extremely unlikely in the real world with a large number of users. However, there is still an issue with the distributed ledger. how would the user reach an agreement on the next entry? The agreement on the next transaction or entry is called the consensus. There are numerous methods of reaching a secure consensus, which is the main topic we will cover in the following section of this video. But before we move on, let's consider the following scenario to show the difficulty of reaching the consensus. A broadcasts a transaction in which A pays B $10 using a valid digital signature. However, there is no guarantee that everyone else will receive the broadcast. As a result, when B attempts to use that money with C or D, there may not be a record of it. So finally, how can a consensus be reached? How is it possible for everyone to agree on the next entry? Let's consider the following scenario and how user can reach an agreement. Each user A, B, C, and D sends one or more transactions, which are compiled into a single common pool. These transactions are processed by a completely different group of people known as the validators. They are not the parties involving in the ledger recorded transaction. Each validator pulls transactions from the pool and places them in the box. One of the fundamental parameters of each chain is how many transactions can fit in a box. For example, each Bitcoin box can hold 1 megabyte, which equates to approximately 2,000 transactions. In this diagram, let's say the maximum number of transactions per box is 2. As you can see, the 2 transactions picked up by each validator are not always identical. The validators would race to close the box. It's as if the validator closes the box lid and stamp an approval sign on it. As a result, instead of listening to each other's broadcast, the user A, B, C, and D would instead listen to the validator broadcast of the approved box and recorded it as the next entry in the ledger. That is how the user arrived at the consensus. But how does the validator close the box? How can we be certain that the closed box is reliable? There are numerous approaches. That, in fact, is the distinction between the proof of work, proof of stake, and delegated proof of stake. To be more specific, the ledger is actually not in the form of a listed entry. When a validator approves the box, it is linked to the previous approved box, forming a long chain of boxes. As a result, it is often referred to as a blockchain. Now, let's take a closer look at how the validator closes the box. We shall begin with the proof of work. A cryptographic hash function is a piece of mathematics that is used in the proof of work mechanism. A function, as we have seen before, is a machine that takes in one or more inputs and produces an output. A hash function is irreversible, which means that calculating the inputs from the output is highly improbable. The hash function used in the proof of work typically accepts 2 inputs: a long list of transactions and a single number as a key. The result will be a very long number, in fact, one with 256 digits. Each digit can only be a 0 or a 1. This output number is referred to as the hash. As shown in the diagram, a minor change in the inputs, either the list of transactions or the key, results in a completely different output. As a result, predicting the outcome is extremely difficult. In other words, we wouldn't be able to predict the hash based on a specific set of inputs unless those inputs were actually entered into the function. Now, how does the hash function help with proof of work? Assume a validator selects a subset of transactions from the pool. The goal is for the validator to find a number or the key that the hash is a number with, say, the first 30 digits being 0. The criteria of 30 digits is arbitrary and subject to change. It could be 30, 35, or even 40 digits at times. We will talk about this later. Because the hash function is irreversible, determining what key would produce the hash with the first 30 digits being 0 is quite unlikely. The only option is for the validator to keep guessing the key and determining whether or not the hash is as desired. However, once the key is discovered, it is quite simple to verify because it can simply be entered into the hash function to check if the hash is indeed having the first 30 digits being zeros. As a result, if a validator can provide a key that yields a hash in which the first 30 digits are zeros, we can be confident that the validator has done the work by making a large number of guesses before arriving at the result. In fact, the probability of finding that key is a half to the power of 30, in which is extremely low, implying that validators will most likely miss it on the first try and has to go through all the work of guessing. The amount of effort expended in locating the key lends credibility to the associated list of transactions. When validator completes the task, he is entitled to place a small tag at the end of the task, rewarding himself with a certain amount of token. These rewarding tokens are not passed down from one person to another. It is, in fact, created or minted, increasing the total number of tokens in the ecosystem. The rate of this rewarding token for Bitcoin, for example, is halved every 4 years. As a result, the number of new Bitcoins created decreases over time. Let's take a look at a proof of work from the big picture. Each validator takes a certain number of transactions from the pool and keep guessing the key until the hash has the first 30 digits equal to 0. Anyone who finds it first receives the block's reward. Since it's a race to the finish line, these validators are sometimes referred to as the miners because they put in the effort to be rewarded. The expected time to solve the hash function decreases as the number of validator increases. Of course, if more people guess, the correct answer will be found in less time. However, if we want the average time taken to close the box to be constant, we must increase the level of difficulty by requiring a greater number of hash digits to be 0. For example, in Bitcoin, the level of difficulty is set so that it takes approximately 10 minutes to obtain the desired hash from all miners. The waste of energy is one of the complaints for the proof of work consensus. The work of the losing validators is completely useless. It does improve system security, but it is undeniable that it consumes a significant amount of power. Another complaint is that it is usually quite slow, with a small number of transactions processed per unit time. Proof of stake is a new consensus system designed to address these issues. In the proof of stake consensus model, those who wish to be validators must lock up or stake a certain number of native tokens. The amount of tokens staked can be any amount, but some chains may have a minimum required amount. Nonetheless, the token is locked for the duration of the person's role as a validator. Now, how do we determine which validator is responsible for confirming the box and receiving the rewards? When it comes time to create another box, a validator is chosen at random. The probability of a validator being chosen is determined by the ratio of his locked token to the total number of locked tokens from all the validators. For example, validator number 2 locks 8 tokens while the total number of stake token is 32. Thus, he has a 25% chance of being chosen for each round for block production. Why does the system work? To put it another way, why should we trust the block produced by a validator that is simply being chosen? If a validator who was chosen for block production forges a transaction or otherwise violates the rule, he will be punished. There are primarily two methods. Jailing, which means he is temporarily banned from participating in block production for a set number of time, and slashing, which means a portion of his lock token is slashed or deducted. Since the responsibility of block production is delegated to a validator rather than a race, the time required to close the box is reduced, allowing transactions to be processed at a much faster rate. Despite the faster processing speed, the proof-of-stake consensus model has a few drawbacks. It is vulnerable to a 51% attack, which occurs when a validator stakes more than or equal to 51% of all the locked tokens. That means he will be chosen for block production on a regular basis and may be able to cause some havoc. However, it is not entirely feasible because the amount of capital required to acquire 51% of token is exceptionally large. Another disadvantage is that the system favors the rich. Those who have a large number of locked tokens have a better chance of being chosen as the block producer and receiving the reward, making them even richer. Validators with a small number of tokens eventually die out because the chance of being chosen is extremely low. Some people find this unfair because it implies that wealthy people are more trustworthy than the others. Delegated proof of stake is a system designed to address this issue. User and node operator stake the native token, which in the case of Axelar is the AXL token. User can choose to delegate the token to one or more of the node operators rather than running for the validator themselves. The top 50 node operators are promoted to a new group known as witnesses, validators, or delegates. This top group is in charge of block production. The reward is distributed back towards the witness and distributed proportionally among the user who delegates their token to that witness. As a result, even users with a small number of tokens have a chance of receiving the reward and the ability to select a trustworthy validator. How does the process of selecting a witness to be in charge of block production work? To simplify the diagram, let's assume there are only 4 witnesses in the system, whereas in the case of Axelar there could be up to 50. These witnesses will take turn producing the block. Each witness has approximately 6 seconds to validate the transactions and so-called close the box. Another round begins after each witness has had a chance to produce a block. What if something goes wrong? In this case, for example, witness number 4 misses the allotted time to close a box, causing a delay in the system. Punishment can take many different forms. Because the witnesses are chosen based on the token delegation from user, if a witness underperforms, user can delegate their token to someone else. As shown in the diagram, witness number 4 may be replaced by another witness when his turn comes up. Finally, the system allows user to democratically select which node operator is worthy of being block producer. Other punishments could include being jailed or having their token slashed, similar to that of the ordinary proof of stake. Let's take a closer look at the allotted 6 seconds for each block production. The witness in charge of that slot is commonly referred to as the proposer. To succeed, the proposer must obtain the approving signatures from at least 90% of the remaining witnesses as he collects the transactions from the pool into the box. As you may recall, the threshold signature scheme discussed in the previous video comes into play here. As a result, no single witness can have complete control over the production of any single box. This significantly improves network security. To summarize, when compared to the proof of work, a delegated proof of stake increases the rate of block production. The token AXL is used by user to select node operators who are deemed worthy of being block producers. This prevents someone from gaining excessive power as a result of them just being rich. Thank you, and I will see you in the next video.